Welcome back to the Magnolia Media Podcast. I'm your host, Jonathan M. Ruggiero. And before we really dive in today, I have just a few comments to make ahead of this 4th of July holiday. As we approach this celebration of our freedom, the celebration of our independence, we must first recognize that as a people, as a nation, we are today less free than we have been in a very, very long time. Something like 50 years, to be exact. Women have lost access to health care. Machine guns have been turned loose on our streets all over again. The sort of machine gun that made the Route 66 festival in Las Vegas, the largest mass shooting in U.S. history, capable. But the Supreme Court had no problem with that, as the Supreme Court has slowly been chipping away at American progress for the last 2 decades. And we have to stop and think to ourselves what the makeup of the court would be if Hillary Clinton had won, rightfully won, the 2016 election, as she did win the election overall by 2.7 million votes. And no, those were not illegal votes from people crossing the border. That's absurd. It's as absurd now as it was when Donald Trump first started spouting this nonsense all those years ago. And still, since 2015, since he came down those incredibly tacky elevators in his tacky building on Park Avenue, Trump Tower, and started ripping into Hispanic Americans. And for that 35% of Hispanic people who think it's a good idea to vote for a racist who has promised to put brown people in internment camps and question their citizenship, even if they've been citizens for 2 or 3 generations, just based on the color of their skin. SCOTUS long ago gutted the Voting and Civil Rights Act, so there's less and less and fewer rights left to Americans. And believe me, next they're coming for IVF, they're coming for contraception, and they're counting on a Trump presidency so they can add 2 more justices to the Supreme Court, probably replacing Alito and Clarence Thomas. So we'd be dealing with 40-something-year-old versions of Alito and Thomas, essentially destroying the American judicial system and all of our rights in the process for the next 40 years. Likely to the end of most of our lifetimes, depending on the age of those of you listening to this. They also bent themselves into an absolute pretzel to find a way to help elderly convict or elderly convicted felon Dementia J. Trump, giving him some form of immunity for the January 6th trial, which has been on pause thanks to this court for more than 6 months. In other words, this thing should have already been adjudicated. He should have already been found guilty, and he should already be serving a serious prison sentence for the hell he brought on Washington, D.C. on January 6, 2021. Instead, there will be no real reason to hold any president accountable for anything they do while they're in office. And keep in mind, a hate group called the Heritage Foundation put this illegitimate court together. They spent decades thinking and designing and stealing ideas from the left in order to plant 6 disgusting worms who again did the most unconstitutional thing possible that America now has a king. And if I were king, if I were King Biden, I'd take control of the Department of Justice, immediately fire the spineless Attorney General Merrick Garland, appoint a sycophant of some sort as interim AG, arrest all 6 conservative worms of the Supreme Court, the illegitimate justices of the Supreme Court. I would send them to a black site somewhere, and then turn my attention to Trump MAGA lackeys in the House and Senate. After that, it would be MAGA propaganda, Newsmax, Fox, OANN. I'd shut it all down. And within a couple of weeks, we would hear the greatest platitudes from these MAGA right-wing congressmen and senators whose souls are literally for sale, and under the threat of some violence, would immediately become the biggest Biden fans in the world. They'd smile and say, we're just good. We were never part of MAGA. We never had anything to do with MAGA. We were never going to vote to overturn election, except for the ones who did vote to overturn elections. And we're just good old conservatives, you know? We're just good old conservatives. However, Biden is a far better man than me. He's been effective, sympathetic, empathetic, and all around a decent man. He doesn't have that in him. He doesn't want to see the American system of checks and balances go by the wayside, even though that has already started. The right in this country, especially the MAGA right wing, the extreme right, the Christo-fascist right, believes they're in some sort of a war. I'm here to assure them there is no war, for none of them have actually ever seen war. So it's just hyperbole. But in their minds, their religion, their way of life is under attack, when actually it's exactly opposite. They are attacking all of us to overcompensate for an irrational fear. It's kind of, a form of insanity. Insanity that these people hold dear with their upside-down flags, or their appeal to heaven flags, or their Opus Dei memberships. Which, I don't know, do you have to pay a due to be an Opus Dei? I don't know, someone should ask Amy Coney Barrett. Yo, Amy! Never mind. She's not listening anyway. As the only one of the 6 parasites on the Supreme Court that represent the rightward portion of the court, I shouldn't say rightward, I should just call it what it is, the fascist wing of the Supreme Court, and she just, she has a little bit of a conscience, not enough of a conscience to, vote against this ridiculous twisting of American jurisprudence in order to give Trump a pass. And Biden is wasting the opportunity, in my opinion, wasting the opportunity to go to work, deciding whatever he wants to decide, pushing through whatever legislation he wants by simply signing executive orders and ignoring Congress, ignoring the Supreme Court, ignoring the Senate. Who cares? You can't impeach me. You can't do anything about it. I'm not going anywhere. And then name a successor and cancel November's election. But again, Biden is a better man than me. Now on to something that truly breaks my heart, as I truly have love and respect and admiration for President Joe Biden. From the time he was a senator, his time as vice president, when I was really coming into my political beliefs, when I was really able to put my finger on exactly what it was I believed and how it worked hand in hand with the American ideal. But here's the issue. It's not that Biden dropped a point or two in the national polls. It's not that we even have the polling data that we'll have by, let's say, Monday to discuss. It's about the fact we now have 12 competitive states, 12 states that could swing the election. New Hampshire, where Biden had been ahead by as many as 10 points, he's barely ahead. Virginia, who only has a Republican governor because he snuck in after an extremely high turnout election in 2021 when 900,000 Democrats decided just not to vote. Since then, Democrats have shown up in the off-year elections that Virginia holds. Well, obviously, they do that for a reason. They try to, keep people at home. Another form of voter suppression. Another thing that should be changed. But anyway, Virginia, which is a 10-plus point Democratic state in most scenarios, is now a toss-up, as is Minnesota, as is New Mexico. These are not states we can afford to be defending down the stretch of the election when we have to win Michigan, which we're now down. Biden is now down 7 points in Michigan. Pennsylvania, Wisconsin, Arizona and Georgia are a plus. North Carolina is a plus. And it's home of that fiery rally that Biden held the day after the debate. The Biden that should have shown up to the debate, whether he was answering the questions directly or not, he should have just been full of fire and vigor, because no one is talking about the dismal debate performance put on by Mango Mussolini, elderly convicted felon Donald Trump, who simply spout lies. Knowing that he wouldn't be fact-checked, he just went like a fire hose every time it was his 122nd turn to completely make a charade of American politics. To completely make a joke out of the most important job in the world. Certainly the most powerful job in the country, if not the world. Just jumping ahead here a little bit, because this is going to be an extremely long episode today. Because it really does break my heart to say these things about President Biden. But based on what he does Friday night in his interview on ABC with George Stephanopoulos, whether he's able to think on his feet, whether he's able to convince the American people in a series of interviews and town halls and things that are going to wear him out because he's 81 years old. He takes the job serious. And if you go back and look at Barack Obama after one term or Bill Clinton after one term, you can see the gray hair. They were young men when they were elected, and it aged them. It aged them. It was very hard on everything from their heart to, again, their hair. It was tough. It has to be tough. Given that responsibility, given that level of leadership in the United States, not being able to go for a drive whenever you'd like, not being able to go for a bike ride unless it's on White House grounds. We all know it ages people, and we don't want it aging an 82-year-old man, or a man who will be 82 if he's reelected, and if he is, in fact, the Democratic nominee. So, let's talk about that a little bit. At this point, Biden is remaining atop the ticket, as he should until at least these polls come out. And consideration should be made with leaders in the Senate and the House as to whether or not he can remain in the race as the presidential candidate. I mean, we already have John Tester in Montana who's fighting for his political life, and a bad showing, even if Biden squeaked out a win, a bad showing by Biden, which that would be a bad showing considering Trump is completely deranged, and I want to see Trump losing by 10 or 15 points in national polls, not by 1, 2, or 3 points. And I believe a younger candidate, almost any younger candidate, would provide that. And the obvious candidate, the only real option, if Biden were to decide to retire, which would be the only way the Democratic Party could do anything about Joe Biden. So if Joe Biden decides to give the entire party the finger, well, they're just going to have to be effed, because they can't force him out. He earned those delegates. He's the one with the, 3,800 delegates? He's the one who'll make the call about his future. It's completely in his hands. And I think that he and Jill being really the primary advisor to Joe at this point in his career, will sit and have a talk about it. Especially, again, once these polls come out and we know more. And again, he's going to hand the torch to Kamala Harris. Any attempt to jump over Kamala Harris at a time when the Democratic Party is having issues with young voters, having issues with voters of color, and want to bolster their position among women who are worried about their health care rights, women who are bleeding to death in states like Texas, hemorrhaging during pregnancy, women who are carrying fetuses that are no longer alive in states like Idaho. In some of the most backward places in America, women are truly suffering. And if you want to fix that problem, that enthusiasm problem with black voters, with younger voters, then put this energetic, biracial woman atop the ticket and watch her run. She's already starting off only down 2 points in a national race against Trump. Within the month, she would be up by 4 or 5 points. I truly believe that. Because everyone, and I mean everyone, when we're talking 70+% of the country, want to see anybody other than Biden and Trump run. And given that option, a real option, someone who can actually win in a Kamala Harris, would swing a lot of voters that direction. It's just that simple. However, it is still Joe's decision to make, and I respect that. I respect that Joe has earned the right to make a decision about his future. He can't be forced one way or the other. It's entirely up to him. Now, this happened with Lyndon B. Johnson back in 1968, but he made that decision in March, not in July, which puts a lot of pressure on the would-be candidate, Kamala Harris, to A, pick a vice president, and B, figure out exactly how to use all of that incredible advertising space, all of that money that Biden has been able to raise. And another important thing is Biden and his conversations with big money donors. While he's been able to raise a lot of money with small money donors, $30, $40, $50, $100 at a time, it's those big money donors that Citizens United requires us to have, even as anti-dark money, anti-big money Democrats, in order to compete with the fascists. Because that's what we have now in America. We have Democrats who range from moderate or conservative to the most progressive of progressives, to the, I would call it, socialist squad, of which I am sort of a member. To some extent, I believe in a certain level of socialism. I believe in high tax rates for wealthy people. I do not believe in the Clarence Thomas doctrine of rich people just mean more than the average American, when each one of us is supposed to have an equal voice. I don't believe in scumbags like Samuel Alito or Clarence Thomas or the lowliest scumbag of them all, the worst Supreme Court Justice of the last 100 years, John Roberts. John Roberts has never had control of his own court. There's no point in calling him Chief Justice because the Chief Justice is really Samuel Alito or Clarence Thomas, and John Roberts is just running around the court all day begging and pleading with them not to subvert democracy any more than they already have. They are low-life sons of bitches. And that's a good old-fashioned Southern term for you, sons of bitches, because that's what they are. So, as Biden makes his decision, and again, by reaching out to big money donors and seeing what the donor class has to say, especially once those polls come out, which everyone's bracing for them, knowing that they're not going to be that great, and the fact that even liberal media, quote liberal media, I'm putting that in quotes because there is no liberal media in this country. It all ultimately runs back to some hedge fund, some billionaire, some centimillionaire who wants to control the direction of the news agency. News agencies that are being traded around like, Pokemon cards. They don't mean what they used to mean. And they certainly don't drive the audience that they used to drive. In fact, the really scary thing is that they're being replaced. Something awful like 24/7 cable news is being replaced by something even more awful like TikTok or Twitter X. With the exception of perhaps Threads, there is no social media platform out there that's going to give you even semi good news, or quality news, I should say. And another opportunity to go after Joe Biden, the New York Times has done just that. And of course, the article was written by, you guessed it, the parasite of all parasites, the dorky little kid who was probably stuffed in lockers as a child and picked on, right alongside, Ted Cruz, Peter effing Baker. And the idea that people start pearl clutching and saying, well, Kamala Harris couldn't beat Donald Trump. Well, just to give you a little glimpse of what's going on right now, Trump 49, Biden 41, Trump 47, Harris 45, and she isn't the candidate. And she may never be the candidate. But it's the only way to transfer all that campaign cash, if Biden does decide to retire, to transfer all that campaign cash without any headache, and to essentially allow the campaign to never miss a beat, to get her out there from the border to the border, from sea to sea, all across the middle of this country. Biden is now losing in the 2nd Congressional District in Nebraska, Maine, Virginia, Minnesota, New Mexico. He's not losing in all those places, but it is much, much too close for comfort. So, if, in fact, President Biden decides to step aside, I would say he'll do it in the next 2 weeks. based on the narrative and the news, based on the polls that will come out between now and then, and the next set of polls that come out after that. If Biden appears to be rebounding, then he should stay. But if Biden is truly tired, if he truly can't find the words when the moment is upon him, then he should consider stepping aside, allowing his vice president to pick up the mantle and run with it. Because I believe that she not only wins, but she wins by a landslide. And if the election were held at this current moment, President Biden would lose by more than 100 electoral votes. That's just a fact. I don't want it to be true because I truly love and admire the man. I look up to him. I think he's an excellent role model for young men. And I think it would be sort of the cherry on top if he decides to step down because he realizes it's his time. I think it will torture him. I think that right now he is being tortured with the decision. But for all we know, he might sit down with George Stephanopoulos on ABC Friday night and make the decision right there. He may be talking to members of the House and the Senate, reassuring them that he will not be their candidate. But as far as these anonymous House members or these anonymous senators or these anonymous staffers with only one actual congressperson coming forward, and that's the fella from Austin, Texas, who has to vote Republicans to keep his seat, and by the way is 77 years old, so, just a couple of months younger than Trump, decides to come forward and say something derogatory about Joe Biden, about Biden needing to step down. I don't believe Biden needs to step down. But depending on what happens in the next 2 weeks, and I mean 2 weeks from right now, Biden has to make that decision so that we can move forward at light speed with a candidate who is capable of moving at light speed, and that's no knock on Joe. I realize he's older. His prime hours are from 10 to 4 in the middle of the day. He has a hard time with nighttime rallies. He has a hard time with the incredible travel schedule that would be hard on a 30-year-old, much less an 81-year-old, traveling all over Europe, traveling to France, returning back on June 16th. The debate happened last Thursday, on the 27th. 11 days isn't long enough for him to rest because that's what his campaign was saying, that perhaps he should have taken more time. More time? You need a full 2 weeks to just sort of kick back and relax after a tough international trip? That does not bode well for you, President Biden. It doesn't. But you have an opportunity here. Either way you look at it, it's a good opportunity. An opportunity to be remembered as one of the great presidents in American history, the man who staved off fascism. Fascism. That's what Biden stopped. He stopped a fascistic takeover of the United States of America by some of the sickest people who have ever lived. He did. And then he passed 7 major pieces of legislation and managed to subvert the Supreme Court and forgive hundreds and hundreds of millions of dollars in student loans, despite whatever the hell it was they had to say. He should have done more. He should have ignored them more often. But Biden has his own way, and we have to respect that. We have to respect the man we chose to lead our democracy and to save us from the threat of Donald Trump. Now, can he do that a second time? We're going to give him a week or two, and we're going to find out. At this current moment, unfortunately, the answer is no. Yet, we will wait and see. I'm excited to see this, nervous and excited to see this interview on Friday night. I want to see him out in front of the press on a regular basis. And the more I talk about it, the more I'm talking myself into Kamala Harris being a better candidate in 2024. She wasn't a better candidate in 2020, but she is certainly, in a lot of ways, a better candidate in 2024 than Joe Biden. She's definitely a better candidate than Vladimir Trump. She is certainly someone who will watch out for democracy. She can boost turnout among Black, Asian American, women, and possibly even Hispanics, which is something we need to begin winning back, especially as the Biden campaign begins to roll out their Hispanic outreach. As they do that, as they broaden their horizons, if you will, I think future President Kamala Harris may not be that bad. Or actually, might be wonderful. We'll just have to wait and see. So, this time, until the next time, for all of you out there, again, if you enjoy this content, consider going to patreon.com/Magnolia Media Network. It's $5. I'm going to start doing a newsletter every week, sort of fill you in on everything that's happened, as all I do all day is consume news, including the disgusting news on Truth Social and Fox, because, well, it's part of the job to understand what they're saying over there too. And, of course, follow my Instagram account at MagnoliaJohn2024. I'm always posting videos. I'm always doing lives. Not always, you know what I'm saying. Quite often. At least a couple a week. And, of course, I need to get that account to 10,000 followers. We want to be able to monetize this thing to keep this type of media going in the southeastern United States for as long as possible, or at least media that was born in the southeastern United States and has a host who is very much a Southern boy and understands how Southern people think and brings a sort of a slanted liberalism that's slanted more toward common sense and in some ways populism. But at any rate, I digress. We'll save the rest of that for next time. Like I said, today was going to be a short episode. So, again, until next time, this is Jonathan M. Ruggiero from the Magnolia Media Podcast saying, be well.